In a busy school cafeteria, a billionaire's 7-year-old son notices something he has never seen before. A little girl sitting alone with no lunch and a smile that hides hunger. What begins as a moment of curiosity pulls him into a world he never knew existed. A tiny home, a struggling single dad, and a truth that shakes his heart. Follow this emotional, suspenseful, and heartwarming story of Wilson and Jessica, where kindness becomes courage, and a small act of love changes 3 lives forever. This story will remind you that real wealth isn't money, it's compassion. If you believe no child should sit hungry and no father should fight alone, this story is for you. 7-year-old Wilson marched into the school cafeteria with the same confidence he carried everywhere. Confidence built from having every toy he ever wanted, every gadget a child could imagine, and every comfort money could buy. He didn't even realize he walked a little taller than the other kids. He didn't notice that his clothes looked newer, cleaner, brighter. He didn't notice the way some kids glanced at him with envy. Today, though, something else caught his eye. He placed his shiny lunchbox on his usual table, the one closest to the windows, where the sunlight bounced off its metal surface like a spotlight. His backpack, brand new, still crisp from the store, hung perfectly from the chair. His pockets were heavy with mini cars, fidget toys, candy wrappers, and everything he liked to show off during lunch. But before opening anything, before even touching his sandwich, his eyes drifted to the far corner of the cafeteria. There, alone at a table that looked too big for her tiny frame, sat Jessica. She wasn't like the other kids who laughed loudly and swapped snacks with excitement. She wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't unwrapping anything. She wasn't eating. Her small hands were folded on the table. Her soft blonde curls fell over her face. Her eyes stayed lowered, fixed on an empty space in front of her as if she were pretending something was there. But there was nothing. No lunchbox, no sandwich, no fruit, not even a simple juice box. Just an empty table and a stomach that quietly growled, so quietly only someone watching closely would notice. Wilson blinked. He thought maybe he missed something. Maybe Jessica had eaten already. Maybe she forgot her lunch today. But then she lifted her hand to her stomach, pressing it gently, as if trying to calm the hunger that refused to be ignored. Wilson's forehead tightened, confusion flickering through his mind. He was used to kids trading snacks, chips for cookies, fruit strips for gummies. He'd even given things away before, mostly to earn attention or hear praises. But this was different. This girl had nothing to trade, nothing to offer, nothing to eat, nothing at all. For the first time in his life, Wilson felt something unfamiliar, a tug in his chest, a weight he didn't understand. It wasn't pity, it wasn't guilt, it was something deeper, something that made him look away, then look back even harder. She looked so small, so fragile, so out of place in a room filled with loud voices and full lunch trays. Around him, kids laughed, unwrapped snacks, spilled juice, shouted jokes, but all that noise faded behind him like someone had turned the volume down. All he could see was Jessica sitting quietly, pretending she wasn't hungry. A thought whispered in his mind, one he had never had before. Why doesn't she have anything? He felt his throat tighten. For a boy who had everything, this was the first time he realized someone else might have nothing. And in that moment, something inside Wilson, something he didn't even know existed, began to awaken. All day long, Wilson found himself glancing toward the back of the classroom. He didn't mean to. He didn't want to look like he was staring. But something inside him kept pulling his eyes in Jessica's direction, like a quiet, invisible string he couldn't ignore. She sat straight in her chair, hands folded neatly, never interrupting, never asking questions, never causing trouble. She looked like the kind of kid teachers would love, yet she faded into the background like she didn't want anyone to notice her. But he noticed her. He noticed how she tried to copy words from the board, even though her pencil was short and dull. He noticed how she tucked her hands under her desk to warm them, as if the morning was colder for her than for everyone else. And he noticed how she kept touching her stomach, the same way she did at lunch. Something twisted inside him, a feeling he didn't like, a feeling he had never experienced. At recess, Wilson usually ran straight to the swings or the soccer field, chased by 2 or 3 boys who always wanted to play with him because he had the best toys. But today, he moved slower, his thoughts heavy, his feet dragging in the dirt. Then he heard it. 2 teachers stood near the playground gate, whispering in the way adults whisper when they don't want kids to hear. "She comes with the same shirt every week," one said quietly, shaking her head. "It's not her fault," the other replied, voice soft. "Her dad works 2 jobs, single father, barely managing, poor thing." Wilson froze mid-step. Single father? 2 jobs? Barely managing? He felt something sharp and cold slide through his chest. Guilt, worry, confusion, and something else he didn't know how to name. He peeked over his shoulder at Jessica. She wasn't playing with the other kids. She wasn't on the swings. She wasn't in the sandbox. She was alone, kneeling on the ground near the fence, drawing shapes in the dirt with a thin stick. Circles, hearts, stars. Little pictures that looked happy even though she didn't. Her shoes were too big, the front bent like they belonged to someone older. Her socks didn't match, one pink, one white, both fraying at the edges. Her hair was tied with a rubber band instead of a scrunchie. But the thing that hurt Wilson the most, every few minutes she looked toward the kids who had snacks, chips, pretzels, fruit cups, juice boxes, her eyes lingering just long enough for Wilson to realize she wasn't simply curious. She was hungry. Again, Wilson's small hands curled into fists. He had everything. She had nothing. Why? Why did her dad have to work 2 jobs? Why didn't anyone help her? Why did she have to sit alone? Why did she pretend she wasn't hungry? A strange emotion, hot, tight, and burning, rose in Wilson's chest. Anger, real anger, the kind that made his voice tremble inside his throat. Not anger at Jessica, not even anger at her dad, but at something bigger, something he didn't fully understand. How could the world let a girl like her go without food? How could grown-ups see her struggle and do nothing? For the first time in his young, sheltered life, Wilson felt something shift deep inside him, an awakening. He wished he could walk up to her right then. He wished he could fix everything. He wished he could give her more than just one snack. But he didn't know how. Not yet. All he knew was this. He couldn't forget her. Not now. Not after what he'd learned. The secret he accidentally heard had changed something in him. Something that would not go away. That night, Wilson lay in his giant bed, a bed big enough for 3 kids his size, yet he felt small inside it. The covers were soft, the room warm, the dim lights glowing gently. But none of it comforted him. His mind replayed the same picture again and again. Jessica sitting alone at the empty cafeteria table, her tiny hands, her quiet stomach, her brave little face pretending not to care. He tossed and turned, punching his pillow in frustration. Why did she have nothing? Why did he keep thinking about her? Why didn't anyone help her? Hours passed, but sleep never came. By morning, Wilson had already made a decision, one he knew no one would approve of. He didn't care. When the last school bell rang that afternoon, instead of walking to his driver like he always did, Wilson let his feet take him somewhere else. He watched Jessica leave the school gates, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her steps small and light. She didn't notice him. Not yet. Wilson sucked in a breath, glanced around, then stepped behind a row of bushes. He followed her. His heart thudded in his chest, loud enough he feared someone would hear it. He hid behind a tall tree near the corner, a mailbox with chipped paint, a parked bike leaning sideways, a row of bushes that scratched his arms. He wasn't used to hiding. He wasn't used to sneaking. He wasn't used to being alone without adults watching every move. But he kept going. Every time Jessica turned, he ducked behind something. His tiny legs moved fast, almost too fast, tripping over cracks on the sidewalk. His backpack felt heavier than ever. He had never been alone in any neighborhood. Not at night. Not in daylight. Not even in the safest places. But this neighborhood wasn't like his. The streets were quieter, too quiet. The buildings looked tired. Paint peeled from doors like old skin. Windows had cracks. Fences leaned sideways. Small yards held rusty toys, forgotten bikes, and broken chairs. Wilson swallowed hard. Fear crawled up his spine, but he refused to turn back. I have to see where she lives, he told himself. I have to know who her dad is. I have to help. Jessica finally stopped in front of a worn-down house, one of those houses that looked older than time itself. The porch leaned at an angle, crooked and tired. The steps creaked under Jessica's small weight. Wilson crouched behind a trash bin, holding his breath. Before he could blink, the front door burst open. It swung wide and hit the wall behind it with a sharp crack, making Wilson jump. A tall man stepped out. But this wasn't just any man. His beard was untrimmed, rough and uneven like he hadn't had time for himself. His clothes were dusty, worn from work and worry. His eyes looked so tired they seemed older than his face, carrying years of struggle no one else could see. Jessica's face changed instantly. Her eyes glowed. Her shoulders lifted. Her whole body brightened. "Daddy!" she squealed, running to him with open arms. Her father, this 35-year-old single dad surviving life one exhausting day at a time, dropped to one knee and hugged her so tight Wilson felt his own chest squeeze. This was the man trying to give Jessica a world he himself barely had the strength to hold. Wilson's breath caught, because in that moment he understood something. This man wasn't lazy. He wasn't careless. He wasn't failing Jessica. He was fighting with everything he had. Fighting to keep his daughter alive, fed, safe. Wilson's stomach twisted with guilt. My dad would lose his mind if he knew I followed someone here, Wilson thought. He'd probably send security, police, everyone. But even that fear wasn't enough to pull him away. He stayed. He watched. He listened. And what he saw next? What he saw in that small, broken yard between a tired father and a hungry child, burned into his heart forever. The door creaked shut behind Jessica and her father, and through the dusty living room window, Wilson could see only shadows moving inside. His heart pounded like a drum inside his chest, too fast, too loud, too scared, yet he couldn't look away. He pressed himself tighter against the porch rail, peeking between two wooden slats. He knew he shouldn't be here. He knew he should have gone home with his driver, but something stronger than rules pulled him forward. Inside, Jessica's dad held her tiny backpack gently, as if it weighed far more than just a few books. "You still had no lunch today?" he asked, his voice softer than Wilson expected, tired but full of love. Jessica's head dropped. Her blonde curls covered her cheeks. She shook her head slowly. "It's okay, Daddy, I wasn't hungry." The words were small, too small. They cracked something inside Wilson's chest. She was lying. He knew she was lying. He had seen her stomach aching with hunger. He had watched her stare at other kids' food. And she lied to protect her father. A father who was already drowning under the weight of 2 jobs and endless exhaustion. Jessica's dad knelt down, cupping her face in both hands. His thumbs brushed dirt from her cheeks in gentle strokes. "I'm trying, baby," he whispered, his voice breaking in the middle. "Just a few more days. Daddy will fix everything, I promise." Promises were fragile things. Wilson could hear it. He could feel it. He could see the way Jessica nodded even though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Wilson's throat tightened until it hurt. He had never heard a parent sound like that. Not defeated, not desperate, not begging life to give them one more chance. His own father spoke with power. Jessica's father spoke with pain. Wilson shifted, taking a small step back, and his foot landed on a loose board. Crack! The sound exploded through the porch like a gunshot. Inside, Jessica gasped. Her father shot to his feet instantly, eyes snapping toward the sound, protective instincts firing so fast it made Wilson freeze in place. "Who's there?" the man shouted, voice suddenly hard, ready for anything, ready for danger. Wilson's breath disappeared. His small body trembled. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. His feet refused to run even though they wanted to, even though they should have. Slowly, painfully slowly, he stepped out from behind the porch rail. His voice cracked before he even spoke. I'm not bad," he stammered, hands shaking. "I'm Wilson, from Jessica's school." For a moment, the world stood still. Jessica's eyes widened, mouth falling open. "You followed me?" she whispered, a mix of surprise and confusion. Wilson swallowed hard and nodded. I saw you had no lunch. I got worried," he said, his voice shrinking smaller and smaller with each word. Silence filled the tiny yard, the kind of silence that carries emotion too heavy for words. Jessica's father stared at the boy, this clean, well-dressed child who didn't belong in a neighborhood like this. This boy whose shoes cost more than what he probably earned in a week. This boy who had everything, and yet had followed his daughter home because he cared. Something shifted in the father's eyes. The sharpness softened. The suspicion melted. The anger faded into something almost warm, something like disbelief. This billionaire's son, this privileged little boy, had walked alone, scared and determined, all the way to their fragile home. For Jessica, the father exhaled slowly, the tension draining from his shoulders. "You were worried?" he repeated, as if he needed to hear it twice to believe it. Wilson nodded again, this time more confidently. And in that moment, in that messy yard, in that worn-down house with fear and honesty hanging thick in the air, 3 lives quietly shifted. Because for the first time ever, someone had crossed the invisible line between their worlds, and nothing would ever be the same. Jessica's dad looked at Wilson, really looked at him, and saw the fear trembling in the boy's shoulders and the guilt swimming in his young eyes. He sighed, long and tired, rubbing a hand across his face. "Come inside before you get hurt out here," he said gently. Wilson hesitated. No one had ever invited him into a house like this. No marble floors, no glowing lights, no sparkling chandeliers or grand rugs. But something in Jessica's father's voice felt safe, safe in a way money couldn't buy. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, sealing him in a world he had never stepped into before. The house was tiny, much smaller than any room Wilson had ever been in. The walls were old, but they were covered with Jessica's drawings. Crayon hearts, stick figures holding hands, little sons with smiling faces. A drawing of her and her dad standing under a tree. Each picture was like a window into her heart, bright, hopeful, innocent. It made the whole house feel warm. Warm in a way Wilson's mansion never felt. The small table in the corner held almost nothing. A single loaf of bread, 1 apple, 2 cheap plastic plates scratched and faded. That was their dinner. Wilson swallowed hard. Jessica noticed him staring and smiled shyly, as if she were embarrassed by how little they had, and proud of it at the same time. "Do you want to stay for a minute?" she asked softly. Her voice was hopeful, fragile, like she wasn't used to asking someone to stay. Wilson nodded slowly. He didn't know why, but he wanted to stay more than anything. Jessica climbed onto a chair, grabbed the apple, and gently broke it into 3 pieces. She didn't hesitate. She didn't choose a bigger piece for herself. She didn't even look at what she was giving away. She simply handed 1 piece to her father, 1 to herself, and the smallest one, so small it barely sat on his palm, to Wilson. He stared at it. It was tiny, smaller than the snacks he usually threw away, smaller than the fruit slices his chef cut each morning. But in his hand it felt heavier than gold. His throat tightened. "Why are you giving me this?" he whispered, unable to look away from the small piece of apple. You barely have anything." Jessica shrugged, her little shoulders lifting gently. "Because you came," she said softly. "And that means something." Those words, simple, quiet, pure, they hit Wilson so hard he nearly forgot to breathe. His expensive tutors had taught him math, reading, foreign languages, piano, even fencing. But none of them had ever taught him this. Generosity from someone who owned almost nothing. Kindness from a girl who had been hungry all day. Warmth from a home that barely had food on the table. Jessica's dad watched the 2 children quietly, seeing something unfold between them. Something rare, something powerful. Wilson lifted the piece of apple to his mouth. He took a bite. It wasn't the sweetest apple he'd ever tasted. It wasn't the juiciest, but it was the first time food had ever made his chest ache. It tasted like kindness, like gratitude, like something precious. People with the least are often the ones who give the most. The lesson filled him so deeply he knew he would never forget it. Jessica smiled at him, small, shy, and innocent. Her dad watched with soft eyes, seeing his daughter offer something she rarely had. And Wilson felt something shift inside his heart. Not a small shift, a huge one. A shift that would change him, change Jessica, change her father, change everything. The next morning, Wilson didn't walk to school. He marched. His mind wasn't on grades, games, or lunchboxes. He kept seeing Jessica's small hands breaking that apple, offering him the smallest piece with the biggest heart he had ever seen. He reached his father's office and stood at the door, breathing hard. "Come in," his father said, not looking up from his paperwork. He was always busy, always calculating numbers, never feelings. But this time, Wilson didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the massive desk, opened his palm, and placed the tiny apple piece, the one he had saved all night, right on the polished wood. His father finally looked up, confused. "What is this?" he asked. Wilson steadied himself. His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. "Dad, we need to help someone." His father raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "A girl in my class, Jessica. She gave me this apple piece yesterday. It was all they had for dinner." The room fell silent. For a moment, the billionaire father stared at that tiny piece of fruit, shriveled, bruised, small, yet powerful. Wilson continued, voice softer now. "She lives with her dad. He works 2 jobs. They struggle for everything. But she still shared what little she had. Dad? No kid should feel that alone. No father should fight life by himself." Something in those words, simple, honest, hit the man in a way business deals never had. He slowly leaned back, exhaling deeply. "Okay," he finally said. "Show me where she lives." Wilson stood beside his father outside Jessica's small, worn-out house. The roof sagged, the paint was peeling. A bicycle with a missing wheel leaned against the wall. Wilson clenched his fists nervously. His father knocked. Jessica's dad opened the door, surprise written across his tired face. "Yes, can I help you?" Wilson stepped forward before his father could speak. "Hi, this is my dad, and we came because you helped me." Jessica's dad frowned gently. "Helped you? Son, I don't understand." Wilson swallowed hard. "You taught me what kindness looks like. I saw how you treat Jessica, how hard you work, how much you give, even when you don't have anything to give." Jessica peeked from behind her father's leg, her eyes wide. His father knelt to her level. "Jessica," he said softly, "your heart is bigger than most people's wallets, and today we want to give back." It didn't happen slowly. It happened right there, right then. Jessica received a full scholarship to the best school in the district. Her father was offered a stable job with proper salary, benefits, and days off, something he hadn't had in years. A repair team arrived the next morning and worked until the little house looked new, warm, safe. Jessica got new shoes, new notebooks, a lunchbox full of snacks she had only seen other kids eating. And for the first time in a long, long while, Jessica and her dad didn't go to bed worrying. A new beginning. 1 week later, as Wilson and Jessica sat together in class, she handed him a shiny red apple. "For you," she whispered. Wilson shook his head. "No, for us." They split it exactly in half. Because friendships built on kindness don't keep score. That night, as Wilson sat beside his father watching the sunset, he said quietly, "Dad, money doesn't make people rich, does it?" His father put an arm around him. "No, son, kindness does." And for the first time, Wilson didn't feel rich because of the house he lived in, or the toys he owned, or the lunches packed in his bag. He felt rich because he finally understood what truly matters. He felt rich because of the little girl who shared her only apple. He felt rich because he chose to share back. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change 3 lives forever.